I'm going to hand over now to Tracey Budding, who's going to be chairing this event, and Tracey's the RCN Deputy President. So over to you, Tracey.
Hello everybody, and thank you all for joining us this evening. As Sarah just mentioned, this is a series of public events that the RCN Library and Archive have been leading on to capture nursing experiences during COVID. So far, we've held events on first response, care homes, mental health, nursing support workers, and you can see these recordings on the library website. Before I introduce the stars of this evening, I just wanted to say my experience of COVID. I was working as a frontline clinical Band 7 sister in a regional neonatal intensive care unit, and was planning ahead to retire early from nursing. I knew I wouldn't retire completely, but I felt it was time, due to some health reasons, to think about taking early retirement. And I think it's fair to say that most people, when the pandemic hit initially, I didn't believe all the information that was out there and didn't take it serious. And the first time I think I did take it serious, when one of my colleagues, a consultant that I'd worked with for many years, got admitted to hospital. And something inside me just says, I just didn't feel that, you know, he was going to come out of hospital. I just had that sixth sense. And that time, a lot of things were starting to build in the press, and all the theories, all the data was coming through. And I think until you have somebody close to you that has gone through that and this deadly disease, I think it's hard to understand, because it was just something that none of us had expected, especially on the scale and how fast that it spread. The challenges that we all faced in healthcare with PPE and resources, but also the strength and the resilience of staff, and the adaptations that we were making on a daily basis, as well as an hourly, you know, and all those staff that were redeployed, and how we were trying to support them in areas that they'd never ever dreamed of working in. But we had staff off shielding, and we were learning as we were going along, and I still don't think that we understand it totally, and because there are so many unknowns, and I don't think we'll know for many years of the true impact that this dreadful disease has caused us all personally, professionally, and as society as a whole. And I just want to say a huge thank you to all staff within the Royal College of Nursing, all members, for, you know, keeping going in these extreme circumstances. It's not easy, and we keep thinking, well, when are we going to come out the other end? And who knows, new strains coming along. I did do some, because I work in neonatal intensive care, I did go and work in adult ITU to help some of my colleagues there who were hit quite badly with the lack of resources and skilled staff. And that was definitely an eye-opener for me. In neonatal intensive care and maternity services, we did see COVID and did have to adapt like all other nursing specialities. But I think critical care units, A&Es, and obviously places like care homes and that, how we've survived and got this far through it is just amazing. And that's about the resilience, the hard work and the commitment that nurses and healthcare assistants and support workers give on a daily basis. So I'm going to introduce, as I said earlier, the stars of the show tonight. And that is Neil Thompson, who's a member of the UK Safety Rep Committee, Maggie Eaton, who's the chair of the UK Stewards Committee, and Derek Brown, RCN Officer of Wales. So without further ado, I'm going to kick off with the first question. Thank you to everybody that's joining us this evening. Really appreciate this. So my first question is to all of you, and I'll take Neil's answer first. What is your very first memory of COVID, and how did you first hear about it, and when did you realise it was a pandemic? Neil.
Well, there have been all sorts of rumours in the press, haven't there? And there was all these rumours on social media, and it was quite a confused situation to start with, because they were talking about lockdowns, and they were talking about a very serious situation developing in Wuhan in China, and we didn't really. There was a lot of confusion, I think, at the start. The first thing that really hit me was when we headed off towards lockdown, and I got a text that told it was it was clearly a scam. And the following day, I got an email from the NHS that said the same thing, pretty much. And the following day after that, I got a letter from the NHS. And that was the point at which I thought, this really is quite serious then, isn't it? And it's, it's saying you've got to go home, you've got to shield, you've got to maintain space within your own place of residence. And so it was really quite shocking, because I had this idea. I mean, although I haven't been a frontline member of staff for some years, because I've been a full-time staff side role since 2009, I really wanted to go back and support my colleagues on the front line doing something out in the field. But then, having had this shielding letter and having to go home, that sort of just put a whole different complexion on everything. And I had to have some quite significant discussions with my organisation about, okay, so if I'm shielding, so what am I going to do now then? So what I'm going to do now is I'm taking my laptop home, I'm taking my chair home from the office at work, and I am working from home. And I had been working from home since middle of March last year. And it's, so on the whole, it's been okay. We've had to get used to lots of different ways of working, some of which are better than others. It's not always comfortable doing Microsoft Teams, but boy, has that been a boon to us all. And it has made so many things possible that weren't possible within our organisations, because I think most NHS organisations were dinosaurs when it came to use of IT before this. And we were only right at the very start of actually developing systems that would make life possible from an IT point of view. And so we were doing an awful lot of travelling that was completely unnecessary, that we now realise is completely unnecessary. We don't need to go trotting off to London every few weeks for meetings. We don't need to go trotting up and down the A614 in Nottinghamshire from Nottingham to Retford and back again for meetings. We can do an awful lot more just on our computers than we've ever been able to do before. The big disadvantage, of course, of that is that you can now have back-to-back meetings all day and go from one to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, without a break. And that's no fun. It can be quite exhausting, and from an eyesight point of view, it's a disaster. But that's life, isn't it? We're all living through this. It's great, isn't it?
Thank you, Neil. Yeah, I think everybody on the call can actually agree with you that although there are positives to it, there has been negatives as well. Maggie?
I'm Maggie Heaton. I'm in Blackpool. It's overcast. It's not sunny, but it's warm. Well, to answer that question, I was actually aware of it in December 2019 to January 2020, having read a report in the media about the outbreak in Wuhan in China. And just after that, there was some little reports filtering through that the COVID virus had been around actually much earlier than that, with examples in both America and France. And the patient in America actually died in the October 2019. So it'd actually been around for a bit longer than we were all aware of initially. Well, I was sort of aware of it, but it'd been around longer than we thought. And I think that's when I started worrying about it, because it was, I'm trying to put this as nicely as I can, it was a bit like kept quiet, not by our government, may I say. I might blame them for a lot of things, but that isn't one of them. But it was getting worrying. And then was it March that we went into lockdown, the end of March 2020. And I feel that nobody was prepared for that. Nobody realized the extent that this virus was going to be hitting us, even now. And we don't seem to be getting much further. I live in the Northwest and we're hotspot again. You know, we're doing everything that we're being told. Well, we are in Blackpool, but it's still a hotspot and we're still having problems. So goodness knows when we're going to go back to normal, basically. And when did I realize it was a pandemic? I think I actually realized that when I realized that the PPE that we were being provided with was so far out of date. And I thought, oh my God, why are we being given masks that are 8 years out of date? And asking questions about that. But of course, it was a stock that they had at the time. And I'll go into all that later on, and I'm sure I'll be asked further about it. So that's when I realized it was a pandemic.
Thank you, Maggie. Yeah, I think we can all reflect on whether we were prepared or not. And PPE is a good example about that, you know, and the organisations running around trying to put systems and processes in place and making sure that it wasn't stolen, and, you know, that you had to sign for things, and, you know, it wasn't appropriate, standard or fit for purpose in all areas, depending on where the activity of COVID positive patients were coming in and out. And I think we've been learning all the way through the journey, and I believe we're still learning now. But thank you. Derek, have you got anything to add about your experience?
Thanks, Tracey, and hello, good evening, everyone. I think from my own perspective, I think I'd probably echo what Maggie and Neil have said. I think the media in relation to the Wuhan outbreak from January of 2020 was probably my first sort of awareness of it, and that sort of steadily ramped up in the coverage of that throughout the sort of January, February time. And I think probably where it sort of hit home and I first sort of registered, and it was getting closer to home and was personally registering with me as a pandemic, is probably when I saw the outbreak hitting Italy and the state that Italy was in very quickly with regards to their healthcare service, and that was really, you know, a front door of the UK. So I think that's when it registered to me that this was a pandemic, and things were going to change very quickly and very drastically in a short space of time.
Yeah, thank you, Derek. I totally agree. Thank you for that first question, guys. There was a question in the chat that I'm just going to answer about problems with revalidation and reflective accounts discussion. I actually revalidated this year, and I used a lot of my experience around those reflective accounts. Actually, majority of my revalidation was around that topic. From all different angles, from going to work in an adult ITU, when I predominantly worked in neonatal intensive care, to dealing with the challenges of supporting staff who are shielding, who, you know, and trying to help members adapt to all of that with all the challenges and the changes in the rules and everything. So I think I'm happy. It's Sheila in the chat. I'm happy to have a chat with her afterwards if that will help. You can get my details on RCN. It's Tracey with an E .budding@rcn.org.uk. Happy to catch up with you, Sheila, on that matter. So I'm going to move on to the next question. And this question's, I'm going to start with Neil. What alerted you to the outbreak, signs and symptoms, and can you tell us about your initial reaction, Neil?
Yeah, my initial reaction was, it was very strange really, because having had this sort of order to go off and shield, I found that really very, very challenging. You know, I'm a nurse. I've been a nurse for 40-odd years, well, 44 years now, and I'm used to being out there in the community amongst people, being the person who's helping them and solving problems and out with my members and supporting them in the community. And suddenly I was told I got to go away and I couldn't come out. And I really found that quite devastating. Well, not depressing, but devastating, really. It's just completely alien to everything that I've ever done before. It took some getting used to, I have to say. And it's, you know, it is a very different way of working. And I suppose, you know, we got the signs and symptoms rammed down our throat every night by the government, didn't we? So, you know, that was, we were all glued to the telly, and we were all getting messages on a regular basis from within our own organisations. And there were lots of issues around what happened when we went into lockdown and what happened to the NHS and the sort of going into command and control mode, which is something that most of us haven't experienced before. Certainly not in recent years. I have a feeling we did over fuel crisis. We went into command and control at that point. But other than that, you know, it's a very long time since we've been into a command and control situation where they stop consulting with you as such and just say, well, you will do this. And then we have to sort of get in and do some pushback with people to say, well, actually, you know, is that the best way? Is that how you really want to treat your staff? Do you want this to be a great place to work? We appreciate that you're in a pandemic. We appreciate that it's a difficult situation. But nonetheless, if you want people to be at work and working well, you have to treat them really well and treat them fairly. And so there's some initial quite heated discussions, I think, within our organisation. You know, we were initially having discussions on a daily basis, as were many other organisations, and it was all quite challenging. But we are where we are, and we've all survived, and we've come out the other side, and we haven't fallen out completely over anything, really. We have, as I say, we have had some very heated discussions on occasions, and you know, no doubt there'll be many more heated discussions. You know, the latest one in my organisation is the prospect of community nurses once again carrying healthcare waste in their cars at the side of their clean dressings. This keeps coming round and round and round.
Okay, thank you, Neil. And Maggie, alerted you to the outbreak, the signs and symptoms?
I think I was alert from the first time I read the articles, and I was continually following the virus via the media releases. But we were actually expecting a pandemic, but all the training that we had was focused on the flu virus, not a coronavirus. The media were sparse to begin with, but as they gained momentum, I began to get quite concerned and reading about the multi-system attack that the virus causes was something we'd not really managed before. And I was concerned, but not for myself, for my family, my friends and my patients. I work clinically as a district nurse. We weren't even given PPE at the start of the pandemic. I'm based during the day in the hospital, because that's where I work my main job. But I continued to work 2 evenings a week as a district nurse. And in the hospital, everybody's in full PPE, and district nurses are just getting vulnerable into patients' homes. The most vulnerable people in society we were visiting without masks. And I actually contacted Donna Kinnear, the CEO of the RCN, several times, almost daily, saying we need to do something. District nurses need to be protecting the patients, because these were housebound patients. We were the ones that would be responsible for taking the virus into them. And that was really concerning for me. So anyway, Donna did raise it nationally, and about 6 weeks into the pandemic, we were given visors and face masks also to wear. But it took about 6 weeks before we got it, and that was thanks to Donna.
Yeah, pretty appalling, really, isn't it, when you look back? And I really look forward to the investigation into all of this, because that was just shocking what we saw on the news. And for our staff and our members that were involved in that, hats off to them, because, you know, we've heard stories in the organisation about staff going in and using bin bags to protect themselves and their patients. Absolutely shocking that in this world today that we had to resort to that. Thank you, Maggie. Derek?
So from a signs and symptoms point of view, I think, as you'd said yourself at the start, Tracey, I think it probably really hit home when I was aware of people who were having to self-isolate because they were symptomatic, and I think that was obviously very much at the start of the pandemic, even before track and trace kicked in and testing kicked in, and I think there was obviously a bit of information overload right at the start, where there was just a wealth of information, and it was, I think from a personal perspective, it was hard to filter some of that out and pick what was relevant and what wasn't relevant, and obviously what was a reliable source. So I think probably working for the RCN, I was quite fortunate that there was that filter in place, and obviously there was that reliable source of information that we were getting, obviously as RCN staff, and information that was reflected on the RCN website that was really pertinent at the time. So I think as people I knew, reps and obviously people in my family became symptomatic and were having to self-isolate, that was my first sort of awareness of proper signs and symptoms, really. The other obviously thing I was cognitive of as well was working in the employment relations team with the RCN as the sort of gear up to lockdown was sort of coming into force. I think that the anxiety levels for members and the, like Maggie's alluded to, the lack of preparedness within the health service was really becoming very evident very quickly, and that really did hit home when it came to, you know, at just being alerted to the onslaught that was coming, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we hear of a pandemic, when I'd heard of a pandemic before in my nursing career, it was always something that happened in another country. The difference with this was that it was happening in every country and it was spreading very, very quickly. And, you know, when we heard of SARS and things like that, and it came into the UK, but it was very small proportionate numbers compared to like what the other countries were dealing with. I personally didn't feel that it was a problem. I just thought that people would be isolated, it would be contained, you would get the right vaccinations and treatment by the experts, and then you would get better and come out. But obviously when we started seeing the death tolls, I think that's when, you know, and people getting the virus, and I got it from my husband and he was fine, and he's the one that coughs and splutters and uses inhalers, and he gave it to me and my son, and I was just taken off my feet for at least 10 days. I could hardly walk to the toilet, you know. I felt so ill, and I was so close to calling an ambulance on a couple of occasions, and it took me months to get over that. My energy levels are nowhere near what they were before I'd got that. So yeah, it's scary at the pace and actually how real it was. My next question is, how did your organisation respond and what was your role? Maggie, I'm going to go to you first.
Yeah. I think, like most trusts, my trust was not prepared for a pandemic, and they managed the best they could in the circumstances. Our staffing levels had been very poor, but they've been actively trying to address this, looking at international recruitment. And what we'd been doing prior to the pandemic, we were recruiting 50 nurses a month from the Philippines. This was all put on hold initially. The command centre was initiated, and as staff side chair, I was copied into the briefs later each day. So I knew what was going on. And for example, with the out-of-date masks and things like that, I was saying to the staff members that came to me, they're saying they've been tested, they say they're fit for purpose, but the staff were really, really worried. Trust also took the stance of pre-booking agency staff. They booked them in blocks, and they came from all over the UK and stopped in the hotels. I mean, I live in Blackpool, so there's hotels everywhere, but we actually block booked some hotels for them. And they were even provided with minibus transport to get them to and from the hospital. Same thing, I believe, was happening with some medical staff, again, trying to address the shortages. Non-essential services were closed and staff relocated to the high demand areas. I was copied into the local COVID report and knew exactly how many inpatients we had with COVID, how many in ICU, how many died overnight, etc. And we're also in the Northwest, we're the cardiac centre for the Northwest, and the cardiac ITU became a second ICU. So we had that facility to be able to add more, but the problem was we didn't have enough ICU trained nurses, and we were using staff from theatres with knowledge and skills in using respirators, etc., helping out the ICU nurses to deal with these patients. But I'll go back, the biggest issue was lack of PPE and the staff fears at the time, because to be quite honest, I've got to hold my hand up to every nurse that worked through that pandemic. They all deserve medals, because no matter what area they worked in, they did a fantastic job and they never complained. They never went into hiding. They did the job to the best of their ability. So,
thank you.
So thank you, Miss.
Sorry, say that again.
I'm just saying thank you, nurses, and healthcare assistants.
Yeah, absolutely. Neil's gone off camera, so can I go to Derek first?
Yeah, no problem. I think looking back, I knowing we were in the meeting this evening, I went back through my diary and just had a look back to sort of the timescales of what happened and how things changed so drastically at the early part of 2020. And what surprised me is we working with the RCN, I was still going out and doing normal business effectively in March, and it wasn't until just before Boris's announcement around the UK lockdown on the 23rd of March that the offices closed, and we were all sort of working from home and working in very different ways. And I think that I think it would be naive to say anybody was prepared for it, and I don't think the RCN as an employer was prepared for it. I think we were all scrabbling for information and scrabbling for ways that we could respond. And I think just from my own involvement, I think that the best way that we helped in just supporting members was in trying to field and as I've said, try and filter out some of that pertinent information, because there was so much traffic around at the time, and some of that was just because people it was desperation, and people were just clawing for anything that would benefit them in their day-to-day in clinical practice. And I think if we've learned anything, it's just that filter needs to be in place so that people are getting the pertinent information as soon as possible and in the right way, really relevant to them. So from an employment relations point of view, I think the way that we sort of helped to facilitate that was just to try and make some sense of what was coming from both the English government and from the devolved government in Wales as well. And I think as the pandemic progressed, that did improve. I think the sort of the directive from the Welsh government definitely took control of some of the information flow, but it took time to establish that and establish that sort of direct link. And at the start, there was just too much information around to make head nor tail of it, really. And I think it's one of the areas we did suffer with, is just not knowing what was reliable, what wasn't reliable, what was the research that was relevant, and I think if anything, that's something that did improve over time, was just to control that flow and make sure that, and I hate to say it, but make sure the science was supporting what was valid and what wasn't valid, really, in making sure that we were safe in clinical practice, really.
Yeah, and you made a valid point there, Derek, about the different UK governments and how differently they worked and how much information they put out individually, and how sometimes that was counter-indicated to the UK government, especially with the devolved countries, and also obviously the political game that comes into anything like this, and nurses were being, I feel, used as the scapegoats of the political agendas quite a lot, and continue to be through this pandemic. But nothing new there then. Neil, did you want to?
Yeah, just echoing what Maggie said in relation to PPE being out of date. You know, we had boxes and boxes and boxes of stuff that was 5 years out of date with new labels stuck on all over it saying that it was okay to use. All perfectly safe. And you do wonder where they think we came from. But hey ho. One of the things that really still irks me and irks all the trade unions, I think, is the RIDOR system, which is clearly not fit for purpose, because in many organisations, including my own, not one single RIDOR report has been written in relation to staff getting COVID in a work situation. Well, how can that possibly be when you have, you know, thousands of staff who get COVID? They can't all have got it from the supermarket or the handle of the door or the coffee room or whatever it happens to be. And the example given by the health and safety executive that if you get COVID in the restroom at work, it's not work related. I'm very sorry, you wouldn't be there if it weren't for the fact that you were at work. So as far as the RCN's concerned, and in the letter that we wrote to them, the health and safety executive last year, you know, very definitely that is a work situation and should be regarded as such. We do have a resolution from the Safety Reps Committee at Congress asking for a review of the RIDOR system, because it really isn't fit for purpose. It's not fit for purpose in particular for community staff, where it's almost impossible to get anything RIDOR reported, because nothing, of course, is related to your nursing. Driving down the road between patients, very often not put in as a RIDOR report when you have an accident, because it's not directly related to the work you do. But you can't get from patient to patient if you don't drive. Hey ho. So there's all those things to take into account. What we did find was an enormous amount of redeployment of people very quickly. We've got podiatrists supporting district nursing teams. We've got speech and language therapists being sent into care homes to undertake swabbing. We've got all sorts of staff being sent hither and thither, doing things that they've never in their wildest dreams done ever before. And some of the risk assessments were quite dubious, I think. Some of them are very good, rather depending on who did them. But some of them, I think, were a bit hit and miss. Not just in my organisation. I'm not sort, you know, I'm talking. I'm the East Midlands rep for the Trade Union Committee and also for the Safety Reps Committee. So I get to talk to people from across the East Midlands. So, you know, when I say things don't necessarily just apply to my organisation, they apply to many organisations in my sphere of influence. And you know, there were an awful lot of things that went well. One of the things that went really well for many organisations, ours included, was that we suddenly started a staff Facebook page. Best thing we've ever done, our Facebook page for staff. It gave people somewhere that they could actually go and vent a little bit, not in the public arena, just between staff. It's given people an opportunity to get to the chief executive very quickly if they need to. We've also got the daily email blog from the chief executive. You know, some of it is written by the chief exec, but an awful lot of it is written by other people, and it feeds into the chief exec's email. But that comes out at 5 o'clock every night and has done right from the start of the pandemic, and that's been absolute boon to everybody. And the other thing, one of our well-being leads have been trying to get Viv up in the trust for around about 3 years. And banging her head against a brick wall, time after time after time. You've got to go to this committee, that committee, to the committee. And at the start of the pandemic, we got 24-hour access for our staff to a dedicated telephone helpline to support their mental health and well-being within 2 weeks of going into lockdown. Because all things are possible all of a sudden when the crunch comes, and you suddenly realise if you don't do something to support your staff, an awful lot of them aren't going to be going off with COVID, they're going to be going off with stress. And they really, really pull their socks up about supporting staff welfare. And, you know, for that, I have to be very grateful, because they've done an amazing job, absolutely, truly amazing job of supporting staff in some very challenging times. It's not perfect by a very long way, but we are getting there, and it's much better in many organisations than it was 18 months ago.
Thank you, Neil. I could talk all day about health and safety and Rydal. We haven't got time. We're already sort of halfway through, and we haven't even got halfway through our questions. So I'm not going to get on my little soapbox about that, but I know the RCN are dealing with that. Yeah, I think mental health services is being pushed into the limelight and up in front. And I think we're going to be seeing the effects of this dreaded disease for many years. And mental health services, no matter what that is absolutely going to be in huge demand moving forward. Thank you, guys. What were your colleagues and members feeling at the time, Derek? And obviously we are pushing for time, so if we can have a slightly shorter answers, that would be fabulous. Thank you.
No problem. To be honest, I think the obvious thing is people were terrified and stressed at the time. I think that's the quick answer. I think just the uncertainties of never having faced anything like this before, irrespective of what people's role was. I think just going into any situation unprepared and going into the unknown like that, it's just terrifying, and it's something I hope we never have to experience again, but unfortunately it is still ongoing, and who knows how many waves of this we're going to have to go through, and what sits in the future. But I think that's the quick answer is just that unpreparedness just bred a whole new level of stress that I don't think any of us have ever experienced before. And I think much as Neil has said, as much as we look to put support services in place, be that through organisational support with occupational health, or external support through mental health apps and other other resources that people could tap into, it just that infrastructure couldn't be built quick enough to deal with the demand, really.
Thank you, Maggie. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, personally, I was actually okay with the pandemic. I think I saw it as quite a challenge, and I like a challenge. But I took precautions that I would with any other infection that we're trained to deal with. But on top of that, I wore a homemade face mask initially during the patient visits to try and protect our elderly population. Had the trust challenged that, I would have fought it. However, there was a lot of fear both in the acute sector and in community. And I had a member who came to me trying to get permission to work from home so she could isolate with her family who were all shielding. They all had COPD or something like that. And that member lived in a caravan throughout all the lockdowns in a drive to protect her family. So she was working shifts and then going home to a caravan on her own in the drive. I just thought I'd tell you about that poor little soul. So that's all I'll add to that, really.
Neil, anything to add to that question?
Yeah, we made use of a few local hotels for staff who were in similar positions and wanting to be at work, but also needing to protect their family and friends. And so 2 or 3 hotels in Nottingham that had members of our staff and NUH staff in them. And I know that the NUH also used some of their own residencies on site to enable people to work through and remain safe and keep family safe. So there's some incredibly selfless acts done by staff throughout the country about making sure that they put patients at the centre of everything that they did, making sure that as far as possible they protected their own vulnerable families and their own parents and all the rest of it. So there's been some incredible acts of bravery, I think, from staff and some real courage shown by so many people. I think that's been absolutely incredible. And whilst there has been some forgiveness by organisations of some staff's behaviours, there are some organisations who have signed up to things like Just Culture, and when we are now dealing with some of the fallouts of what happened during the pandemic and incidents that happened during the pandemic that were put on hold, some of the attitudes towards Just Culture I find are sadly lacking. And there are many, certainly within my trust, I think we have a very long way to go before we can truly say that we are practicing Just Culture in our response towards some of our staff when things have not gone according to plan. It's a big, big challenge, and I think it's going to be a big, big challenge for the RCN going forwards.
Totally agree, Neil. A huge amount of work to do, I believe. Okay, moving on. What kinds of conversations were taking place within your organisation? Emergency planning or rescheduling and configuring the services? Neil, I'm going to go to you first.
Everything got cancelled, including health and safety meetings to start with. And we had quite a strong pushback from staff side, particularly about health and safety meetings, because, you know, when you're into this sort of situation, the one thing that you need more than anything else is your health and safety committee. So we did manage to get that reinstated, but not as quickly as we would like. And we did then have this, we're a different organisation to most. We don't have a staff side chair and a staff side secretary in our organisation. We have an overarching trust staff side chair, and then we have a staff side chair for each of our 3 other divisions. So in total, there's 4 of us who are in the position of staff side chair. And so that is quite unique. And what we had was meetings with what they called the People and Culture meeting, which was, to start with, was every day. And then, you know, then it was twice a week, and then it was, or 3 times a week, then it was twice a week, and eventually down to weekly. And now we've done away with it altogether. But that was a useful environment where we met together with management, HR people, wellbeing people, the world and his wife, in order to thrash out issues that came up that day or have been discussed nationally on the Gold Command phone call, and we've got an enormous amount of work done like that. We fed back to staff side on a regular basis, and we're feeding stuff up and down and backwards and forwards in order to. So that was incredibly busy for time for all of us from a staff side perspective, because we had this big meeting in the morning. We had to feed back to staff side. We had to get the view back from staff side to feed into the meeting the following day. So there was an enormous amount of work involved with that. And on top of that, we had members calling who were sometimes very distressed because of what they were being asked to do and the pressure that was being put on them. One of the things that we have noticed coming out of the pandemic, because people have been split up and isolated from each other, when we're now putting people back together, is quite a big problem with incivility. And because I think people have not had that sort of rubbing along with each other, whether they get on with each other or not, but just rubbing along reasonably well in the office. When you've taken them out of that environment and now you're pushing them back into that environment, the difficulties of some relationships are becoming apparent. So that's quite an interesting situation that we're dealing with at the moment.
Maggie, anything to add?
As I mentioned previously, operationally, we really stepped up and we were making contingency plans related to staffing with the block booking of the agency staff. But normally what happens with agency staff is they come and they'll do a shift on one ward and do a shift on another. But these were specifically being allocated to the same wards to ensure that they quickly became familiar with the ward, the duties required and the routine in that ward. Our outpatient services, like Neil was saying, they just closed, as did elective surgery. What I did find was patients weren't allowed to have visitors, were they? And staff were finding innovative ways for patients and family to communicate. Management did their part to maintain services, but our nurses were fantastically innovative when it came to comforting the patients and their relatives. The other things that I'd like to add was the risk assessments were being done for all staff, the concerns over self-isolation and the problems that was causing, because some people didn't want to self-isolate, others were very happy, but a lot of them didn't want to self-isolate. And the working from home, the way that suddenly became a thing for the non-frontline workers, and getting the IT equipment to enable them to do that was very quick. And of course, as Neil mentioned as well, the members' concerns. There was various concerns, but I felt that most of the concerns didn't even relate to COVID. They just took that as the role. So that's all I'll add to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. Derek, anything you want to add to that question?
I think probably very similar to what Neil and Maggie have already said. I think that there was different dynamics within the RCN, because obviously we were being asked to work in very different ways to meet a demand that historically we'd not met before, with the volume of member contacts we were getting, and member contacts in very different ways. We weren't out and about anymore. We were working from home. So adapting to make sure everyone was safe in new ways of working, but also supporting reps, members and colleagues as well. And it I think from an organizational point of view, the organization adapted very quickly, and it was really about trying to match the demand, and a lot of the immediate work that was undertaken at the start of the pandemic was around supporting that front end service, supporting sort of the RCND traffic that was coming through. We were trying to support each other because obviously there was added pressure. We run a duty officer system in Wales, so when members are coming through referred from RCN Direct, they're referred through to the duty officer, and we initially ramped up the support so there was more of us doing duty officers on each particular day. And that was just necessary to try and be there to give advice and support members who were in just desperate situations at the start. I mean, it's just some of the stories you were hearing were just horrific, and some of the situations, as Maggie and Neil have already said, some of the situations people were being asked to work in were just appalling, really, and it was trying to both support the members in tackling some of that, but also make sure the members' well-being was front and center as well, and they weren't being forced and feeling like obliged to work in situations which were just unsafe to work in, really.
Yeah, when I went and did 4 weeks in the adult ITU, I worked alongside a maxillofacial surgeon, and he just says, I'm just doing whatever I can. And I haven't nursed adults for many years because I've been working in NICU for almost 30 years. And so even though I was familiar with an ITU environment, from looking after a 23, 25 week premature baby to looking after an adult, and all these groups of people coming around doing turning, and they had a whole team of people coming and doing turning, and making up drugs and fluids and things like that. Everybody put their hands to their helm and just did whatever they could. I felt totally out of my depth, even though I'd got some basic knowledge of ITU working. And the IT guys in all the organisations have just been amazing in trying to connect everybody virtually and set up and train a lot of us people who are not that tech savvy, and support the services, and obviously the counselling services and the mental health impact, and the amount of members that have been scared, and all the resources that we've had to just build up and double, or if not triple, resources in areas that were already struggling before the pandemic, and the challenges that everybody found themselves in. So thank you for those reflections.
I can't thank our IT guys enough. They have been absolutely superlative.
Yeah, I think in every organisation.
So many people.
And I think moving forward
so
around the hybrid, sorry Neil, the hybrid, the way we're going to have to work in the future, we're going to have hybrid models where, we found that it's not necessarily to travel across the country to be involved in a lot of the work that we do. Across the piece, really. So it's going to be the new normal, isn't it, moving forward? What were the priority issues for nursing staff? Maggie, I'm going to start with you, lovely. You're on mute, Maggie.
Sorry. I believe the priorities for our members was to, and still is, to care for our patients to the best of their ability. And that's from the nursing support workers through to the director of nursing. Occasionally I would hear them talk about their fear, but mostly it was about the needs of the patients and how these would best be met. My other role is as staff side chair, which I said earlier, and I'm an RCN steward and health and safety rep. I could have worked from home, but chose to go into my office every day. My belief was that the nurses needed the reassurance that the RCN was there for them. I got complaints about masks being out of date. I contacted procurement on this issue and was told they'd been tested and they were fine for use. I even asked about stock rotation, but I don't really believe they knew what stock rotation was. I sew as a hobby, and a friend of mine saw a Facebook page called For the Love of Scrubs. I asked the trust if we were struggling for scrubs and was told that we were. The demand on the factories making scrubs was so great that they couldn't manage everybody. So this turned into a massive project. I asked the trust if I could get local volunteer sewers to make some that would that be acceptable. They snapped my hand off. at first I said, how many sets do you want? 500. But when we got to 500, that wasn't enough. I advertised locally on Facebook, and overnight I had over 150 local stores. I coordinated this group of volunteers. I went to our trust charity and they paid for the materials. Altogether, we made over 1,900 sets of scrubs, 1,200 scrub hats, about 5,000 face masks, even though they couldn't be worn in the hospital. They were for people to protect themselves outside. And hundreds of COVID hearts. And, scrub bags, about 4,000 scrub bags. I saw this as a way of helping our colleagues on the wards to stay safe. I nearly always did the delivery of the pre-cut material and the collection of completed garments myself. And I can tell you, it was really wearing me out. I was absolutely on my knees. I told the senior management team they allowed me to use the trust driver when I found it overwhelming. Eventually, some of the stores offered to collect in their locality, and I would collect from them. It became like a fully inclusive wee business. We had people cutting out the patterns, some ironing, some sewing, some delivering and me coordinating, except for two lots actually. They actually came from Saudi Arabia. Really and truly, they came from Saudi Arabia. We had a volunteer there. It was really hard work. I still feel I was supporting our members who were working on those wards, and they knew I was there for them. And those scrubs have nearly all gone missing now. They've got them at home, and they've got wee hearts inside. Some of them have put wee hearts inside them, so they knew that the public were supporting them. And they got a real boost from that. So I just wanted to share that.
No, thank you, Maggie. That was absolutely amazing. And we had, people who usually knit for premature babies were knitting all the things to put on the back of the masks and making bags for us to put our dirty uniforms in. And it's amazing what the British public do when it gets tough. And so hats off to all those and all the local restaurants that had brought loads of food and made curries and things like that to support the NHS, and just absolutely amazing, the general public. So we mustn't forget their part that they played in trying to support the staff as best they could. Good old British public, and I'm very proud to be British. So thank you to everybody that contributed in whatever way it was during the pandemic, because the nurses and all the staff on the front line did appreciate, even if it was a free curry, or, because for us on the front line, it wasn't much different for us because we were going to work, unless you were forced to shield. So, I used to get frustrated at people saying I'm bored. I was thinking, God, I haven't got time to be bored. I wish I had time to clear all my cupboards and my wardrobes out and sort all my charity stuff out. I didn't have time to do any of that because I was working full time and more to support those staff that were shielding, like many other colleagues. Derek, did you want to add to any?
I think Maggie's covered it really well. I think the patient care is always the primary focus, but if I could add to it, it would only be to say it's being safe in undertaking that patient care as well. And much as the demands ramped up, it was trying to make sure that as much as possible there was that guidance in place to ensure that people weren't being put in those vulnerable situations, which we've all heard of. We've all sort of heard from members where there were just terrible situations that members were put into, and I think it, as much as possible, it was just trying to reinforce some of the positive advice that was out there, and if that could be sort of guided towards members, then that's really what they needed at the time, because they didn't have the time or opportunity to go looking for information. So it was about trying to guide them towards that and making sure they had the pertinent advice. And obviously, that was sort of done in real time, because that advice was changing hour to hour, day to day, really.
Yeah, thank you, Derek. Neil, anything to add to that? Totally agree, Derek.
Yeah, just backing up what Maggie said as well. You know, it would have been lovely from my perspective to have been able to get out and about, but having to shield was an enormous shock to my system and the other people's systems. We had lots of people who were shielding, who desperately wanted to be not shielding and able to work within our health systems. But actually, what I have learned is that, you know, because several members said to me, Neil, we need you to be shielding because we can't afford you to be ill, because you've got to be there to support us. And, you know, it was a big lesson to learn, really, from my perspective. And it all stems back to my little illness at Congress a few years ago. And, you know, so that was why it all came about. And so it was a difficult time for lots of us, but actually it is perfectly possible to do this job from home or from a computer, as I have learned over the last 18 months or so. And, you know, it's just been a real innovative journey for so many of us, and learning to do things in different ways. And we can still support patients. And I do support patients, even though I haven't had direct contact with the patient for a number of years. I'm still nursing my colleagues to enable them to give the best support they possibly can to our patients. And it's just as important, in my view, and in the view of my members locally, and not just my members, but as staff, because as I work as a staff side chair, part of my job role is to support all our staff. So I find that is really, really important. And there's lots of staff who come to me on a fairly regular basis, just needing a little bit of my time in order to discuss something, sort something out, just get through the day. And that's great, because, you know, that's potentially another trade union member. It might not be my trade union, but it might be another trade union member for somebody, because our organisation is a place where stuff happens and you need the protection of your trade union. And I would advocate in all organisations, whether you're in the NHS or not, you need the protection of a trade union. Even if your organisation won't give trade union recognition, you can still get an awful lot out of a trade union and be part of something much bigger. Enough said.
Thank you, Neil. And one of the beauties of doing Teams or Zoom is that your pets come and join you. So I've got my two dogs. One's joined me on the back settee there, and one's at my feet. So I love watching all the Zoom, you know, with all the pets coming in, because I'm a big animal lover. So we are running out of time. It's been great. There's a few more questions, but I'm going to try and be cheeky and try and get two more questions in. So looking back, can you share your key reflections? What went well and what could have been done differently? And I'm going to ask Derek to answer that one first.
I'll start with the good. That's probably always a good point to start with. I think what went well is working with the RCN. I think that there was some real positive aspects around, particularly in Wales, around the way we work as a team, and I think the way we sort of reinforced a lot of that, you know, at the start of the pandemic, with if not daily, you know, catch-ups every other day within the team. It was also something we built into support for reps as well. So it was making sure that we had regular catch-ups with reps as a group as well as individuals, because I think that was something that they immediately were lacking, was that bit of peer support and a bit of camaraderie that they would have had had they been out and about and seen each other, and that just disappeared very, very quickly. I think that aspect of it was one of the real positives to come out of it. And as Neil and Maggie have already said, I think the infrastructures around IT support and ways of working that have come on so quickly in the use of Teams and other networking platforms that we all use now and take for granted. I think moving forward, it's really going to be to our benefit in communicating with other staff, with other members, with other reps, that we use that, and we don't have this default of having to travel here, there, and everywhere, and drift back to old ways of working, in a sense. From a negative point of view, I think, as I said at the start, we were on the back foot. I think all organisations were on the back foot, and I think I don't think we're even at the point where I could say I'm confident that we're not on the back foot, because information and research is always being updated, and this is a horrible disease that has a habit of surprising us when we least expect it, and I think from that point of view, I think one of the downsides is that I don't think we can ever be ready for what's next. It's just learning as much as possible from where we've come from and what we've been through up till now, really.
Thank you, Derek. Yeah, I totally agree. Neil, anything to add to that?
Only, I think the big plus really is the speed at which organisations have upped their game in relation to IT, and the way that so many organisations have upped their game in relation to staff health and well-being, because they had to and there was no choice about it. The downside is the fact that people have been isolated from each other, and we've had to do quite a lot of work supporting people with domestic violence, and that has become a problem, I think, in many parts of the country that is evident, where you push people together into this situation and you don't give them a choice about being in the same space for much more time, then inevitably relationships that were hard to start with can get an overspill, and having to manage those situations is going to be difficult for many of us for a long time. But I think the way things are going in organisations generally, I don't think that any of us going to be short of work anytime soon, because it strikes me that organisational change is rife. Whilst there have been some improvements as a result of just culture in some areas, there is still an enormous amount of work coming forwards where we are having to support staff in some very challenging situations. So I don't see, although I'm planning to retire and return in November, I don't see that I'll be coming back to an empty desk.
Yeah, totally agree, Neil. Maggie, anything to add?
Yeah, I can only answer that passionately, as it really is a difficult question. The thing I'm most proud of is, as a student safety rep, I did everything I could to keep our members safe. However, it was at the cost of my own well-being due to the stress it involved. I like to think I look after the nurses who look after my patients. So what could have been done differently? I think I could have accepted working from home earlier, because I was so determined that I was going to be in work looking after the nurses. But my husband had an accident back in early February, and I've been working from home since then, looking after him. So I've been working from home, and yeah, it does work. I'd still prefer being in work. But the other thing, it's nothing to do with the NHS, really. I think globally, well, especially for the UK, we should have locked down the UK completely. We're an island. We could have been safe from this COVID virus.
Thank you, Maggie. Yeah, and I think a lot of unanswered questions, and I so look forward to the review and holding those people in power to account to, the dangers that they put the public and healthcare workers in, whether that's lack of PPE, already not taking nurse shortages seriously. Before a pandemic, we were almost at 50,000 nurses short in the UK. That has just got worse. I know there's lots of people that are retiring early. The pandemic has just about finished them off with the pressures and the challenges that they faced during the pandemic. And it's a hard one, isn't it? Because you want to be there to protect your patients and your staff, but you know, we've got to look after ourselves first and foremost, because if you don't, you're not going to be able to look after those patients or your colleagues. So it's important what you says, Maggie. You've got to look after number one first, and I found that very, very hard to do. But sometimes you have to do that to survive. I've got one final question that I'm going to ask to all of you now, because we are running out of time. As I says, it's time flies when you're having fun. So how can we lock in the learning for the future, and what 3 priorities should we, as the RCN, put in place to help support reps and staff? And I'm going to go to Maggie first.
Funnily enough, our trust is looking at this same question. How can we keep the good that COVID brought to the workplace? Because there is some good practice that's come and things that have worked really well. But I think too many decisions are made at a very high level, and a lot of the decisions during COVID were made on the shop floor level. And I think that has brought about quite a lot of changes. So we're currently trying to capture all them positive, and I think the RCN also needs to capture the positives that have happened within the RCN and adopt that as the norm. My biggest fear for the NHS and independent organisations, the RCN, is that there'd be no change, no learning, not just locally, but nationally and internationally. We must ensure that any health concerns internationally are contained immediately to stop the spread and devastation pandemics bring with them. And we can only do that by applying pressure to places that have got something brewing. We need to be looking at it. We need the World Health Organization to be working with us. So it's pressure that organizations like the RCN can put and build on. And I think it might be a little bit too deep, that response, but that's how I feel about it. So.
Thank you, Maggie. I totally agree. There's a lot to learn. I think there has been a lot of good, but we need to think wider and how we connect internationally. Wherever healthcare is being delivered, we should be connecting with those organisations and supporting each other and learning from what went well, but also about, with best practice, but also about not reinventing the wheel, but also about, those things that didn't go well, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Look at the elements of what did go well in that area, and about communication is key, I think, isn't it? And we have improved on that. I saw a comment in the chat about how it has allowed us to meet people that we wouldn't necessarily have met. So we've got to always take the positives and work together stronger to deal with the negatives and push forward to improve for everybody, not the minorities. And if you think about the decisions that you were talking about, Maggie, that were being made by politicians, bringing private healthcare into vaccinating, test and trace, and all the failures that happened at the beginning with all of that absolute shambles. And as soon as the NHS and frontline staff took control, it was the success it is today. So we need to make sure that the right people are making those decisions on our behalf. And I'll continue, as long as I've got a breath in my body, to speak up for nurses and nursing wherever I can, against people that are making those decisions in government who haven't got a Scooby-Doo what they're doing or talking about. there needs to be more nursing voices around those top tables, and that's one of the things I want to try and achieve. Thank you, Maggie. Neil?
Yes, and I mean there was an interesting article last weekend from somebody who's wanting to be the boss of the NHS about some thoughts around getting rid of foreign workers in the NHS, and I'm thinking, oh God help us, please no, anything but that, because she clearly doesn't know what she's talking about and didn't know what she was talking about at Test and Trace half the time, and caused lots of problems, many more problems than she solved, in my opinion. And I appreciate that it's only my opinion, but nonetheless, I think it would be a disaster for us. What we need to learn from this is keep decision making as low as possible in an organisation, because that way you get better decisions. If you make decisions on the front line about a frontline problem, then you keep things small and you don't get things out of proportion. Don't do things to people, do things with people. Is another great lesson that our organisation in particular needs to learn, because we're a great organisation for doing things to people and not necessarily involving them with. And it's still a problem, and it needs to change. Great that we have done so much from an IT point of view. I think it has really brought IT departments to the fore and made us realise just how much can be done with a computer, and where, you know, we can probably get rid of a significant amount of office space, because we really don't need it. We don't need to be in that office every day of the week. We could spend half time working from home or working remotely from another base that was closer to home, and thereby we could get rid of an enormous amount of redundant stock of NHS property, because it really isn't needed. You know, so we spend money heating it, we spend money on security, we spend money on maintaining it. Let's just decide that actually we don't need it, because we can work in different ways, in new and innovative ways, that will be better for patients, better for staff, and better overall for the public purse. If we're not spending thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds on all the maintenance and the upkeep of these buildings that are redundant largely. So I think that's about it really for me.
Thank you, Neil. And you made a good point about, you know, travelling in and out of offices and back and forth to work. And, you know, we have to remember the effects on the environment and how important that is to sustain, you know, better, clearer air policies and, you know, reduction in recycling and all of that. You know, we've learned a lot through the pandemic because we've been forced to, and we need to take all those good points moving forward. Derek, anything to add?
I think just how we lock down learning, I think as everyone said, just removing that silo working and remember it is a national health service. And from that point of view, move it away from a business model to a healthcare model. I think that's an easy way of locking down learning from this. With 3 priorities moving forward, I'd say, as both Maggie and Neil have said, firstly, listen to your clinical staff. They're the ones on the shop floor. They're the ones that know the situation day in, day out. I think secondly, make sure they're safe in their work and make sure that they're safe in their day-to-day. And thirdly, give them a pay rise. Get signed up with the RCN pay campaign. It's
absolutely. It was very remiss of me not to add that in, wasn't it? Well done, Derek. I think we've got about 5 minutes left. Sarah, I'm just checking. Have we got time for one final question?
Yeah, we've got about 5 minutes here.
Oh, lovely. Thank you. Because I think this is quite an important question that I would really value your input on. When did you realise that COVID risks were higher for certain groups, BAME, and what impact did these inequalities have? I'm going to start with Derek.
I think, unfortunately, with the BAME community, I think it was as the data became evident, really, and as research unfolded to show that those communities were disproportionately impacted. I think that was really, really telling, and I wouldn't like to say that I had any insight into the impact that COVID had on that community ahead of it being published in the research and the data. I think what happened afterwards, once that was clearly evident, was a lot of work with members on board in reinforcing this, in making sure that organisations had adequate risk assessments, making sure that those risk assessments contained and reinforce the risks that the BAME community had and that COVID presented to them. And also just making sure that individual organisations and employers had an awareness of their responsibilities to their employees, and particularly to that community and the risks associated with COVID. I think work around fit testing and appropriate PPE was invaluable. But unfortunately, I think speaking from my heart, I don't think we had any true insight into the real tragic impact that COVID had until the research started to unfold and present itself, really.
Thank you, Derek. Yeah, and we're still learning, aren't we? We're still learning about that data. And when I was working in adult ITU, there was a higher proportion of people from Black and Asian minority ethnic groups that were in those ICU beds, and that was quite shocking for me, because you hear of all the data on the news and that, but actually seeing it is and the risk assessments, yeah, they were good, but I think a lot of trusts and organisations wasn't good at interpreting the risk assessments appropriately. And I know I had some challenges trying to do the risk assessments with colleagues as a senior band 7, and you know, some of the risk assessments wasn't fit for purpose. And I think when you're in the middle of trying to deal with something, you haven't necessarily always got the time to adapt it and learn best practice and what's correct. You just sort of scraping risk assessments together, and there was a lot of conflicting information, as we said earlier on the call, around the data and the information that we needed to gather. So it's about us moving forward, learning from best practice risk assessments that would tick all the boxes and meet all the needs for both the individual and the organisation moving forward. So lots of lessons to learn around that. Maggie?
I think the media did a really good job in highlighting these inequalities. And initially, my trust wanted to put out a comms that all Black and ethnic minority staff should undertake a risk assessment, and HR were leading this. I was on a call with them discussing it, and I just said, what risk assessments are they going to use? And they said, oh, the normal risk assessment. I went, well, that's no good. I said, that's not getting their risk. We need to identify every risk factor they've got to find the likelihood of them contracting COVID and making sure that they're safe. And so we actually worked together to do a new risk assessment, incorporating their cultural high risk areas, the prevalence of diabetes, heart disease, multiple occupancy households, etc. And just as we were ready to launch that in our trust, the NHS decided they'd done it. So we never actually used it, but we've done our footwork on this. And because of that, HR now have a greater understanding of the specific needs at the end of the project. So it wasn't just for the Black and ethnic minority staff, it was about anybody with specific conditions may need a specific risk assessment. So there was some good come out of that as well.
Absolutely, Maggie, thank you. Neil?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it hit home to me was when there was a couple of deaths at one of our hospitals just up the road from us in Derby, of an Asian doctor, and then there was not long after that another Asian doctor. I think they've had 5 of their staff gone in total, and that really started to bring things home about these risks to individuals. Sorry, my son's just come. Sorry, so it's made things very much more challenging. I know that I've had a couple of colleagues from BAME communities who have been forced to shield, who would normally be doing ward work, and so they've not been able to do the work that other people, other members of staff have been able to do, and that's been a big challenge to the organisation initially and to their managers, who really didn't understand in the first instance that they were at very much greater risk because of their long-term conditions on top of their ethnicity. And so that was a bit of a challenge to start with, and we needed to get some support from the regional office with some of that. But it got sorted in the end, and I think it's been a big learning curve for lots of us in so many ways. And I just hope that going forwards, we do maintain that learning, and we maintain the relationships that we've built with people in different parts of organisations, which have been so useful. That we've connected with people that under normal circumstances we probably never would have got to know, and it has been really, really successful in so many ways. And there is just so many things that we've really got right, and now we've got it right, we need to keep it right going forward.
Thank you, Neil. Yeah, well put. And I just want to say a huge thank you to my 3 colleagues here for taking the time to answer those questions and give us your view on what has been quite a challenging year for a lot of us. We've gone a couple of minutes over. I want to say thank you to the staff in the background who have facilitated this. Thank you to all the members that have joined us this evening, and if there's any questions that we haven't answered during the time, I think we did try and answer as many as we could going through. Please you can contact me personally and I'll get an answer to you. My email address was on the chat, tracy.budding@rcn.org.uk. I just want to take this opportunity to say a huge thank you to everybody working in healthcare over the last 18 months, nearly 2 years. It feels as if it's just going on and on and on, for all you've done, and including all the volunteers, all the people that supported the NHS staff and care homes and everybody in Britain, basically. I just want to say a huge thank you. Neil Thompson, Maggie Heaton and Derek Brown, thank you so much. Have a good evening, everybody.